The pressure was a god. Down here, 11,000 meters below the Pacific's sun-dappled surface, it was the only deity that mattered. It squeezed the titanium alloy hull of the submersible Hadal with a constant, unimaginable force, a reminder that human ingenuity was merely a fragile bubble in a realm that did not want it. Inside, Dr. Aris Thorne felt the pressure in his bones, a deep ache that mimicked the phantom grief he still carried for his mentor, who had vanished in these same abyssal plains a decade ago. "Anything on the forward sonar, Kalen?" Aris asked, his voice deliberately calm. His breath plumed in the chilled, recycled air. Kalen, a former Navy pilot with nerves forged in underwater demolition, kept his eyes glued to the array of screens. "The usual ghosts, Aris. A whole lot of nothing pretending to be something." His hands danced over the controls, a concert pianist playing in the world's most dangerous orchestra. "Pressure is stable at 16,000 psi. Life support is green. We're just burning battery, chasing your professor's folktale." The folktale was the Erebus, a vessel rumored to have been lost in a typhoon in the 1930s, but which Professor Albright had sworn was something more. He'd spent his life chasing whispers of a wreck far older than metallurgy should allow, a ship that had supposedly found the source of the world's first song. Albright's final, garbled transmission had come from this very sector of the Mariana Trench. Then silence. "It wasn't a folktale," Aris murmured, looking past his own reflection in the thick quartz viewport into the absolute crushing blackness. The Hadal's external lights sliced through the void, illuminating a slow, hypnotic ballet of marine snow, the decaying detritus of the world above. "Contact," Kalen said, his voice suddenly sharp. "Bearing 005. Big, too big to be a whale fall, too structured to be a geological formation." Aris leaned forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. On the main screen, a ghostly green outline began to resolve from the sonar data. It was immense, elongated, and wrong. The lines were too fluid, the curves too organic for any human vessel. It looked less like a ship and more like the fossilized remains of some colossal sea creature. "Take us in, slow," Aris breathed. The Hadal crept forward, its thrusters emitting soft, muffled hums. The object grew on the sonar, and then, finally, it entered the cone of their searchlights. Aris gasped. It was a ship, but like none he had ever seen. The hull wasn't made of riveted steel plates, but of a single, seamless expanse of a material that shimmered like polished basalt, yet seemed to be interwoven with a coral-like lattice. It was ancient, scarred by millennia of unimaginable pressure, yet largely intact. It was fused to a rocky outcrop as if it had grown there. Strange, spiraling glyphs unlike any human script were etched along its flank. "My God," Kalen whispered, all traces of his earlier cynicism gone. "Albright was right. This isn't the Erebus," Aris said, his mind racing. This is what the Erebus was looking for." For 2 hours, they circled the wreck, their cameras documenting every impossible detail. There were no entry points, no hatches or doors. It was a sealed vessel, but one section of the hull had been breached, a jagged tear revealing a dark interior. It was a wound, not a design. "I have to go in," Aris said. "You're insane," Kalen countered flatly. "The Hadal won't fit. You're talking about a remote drone we send in the ROV. The manipulator arms on the ROV are too clumsy. Look at the size of that opening. It's tight. If I see something, I need the fine dexterity of the main arms. I'm taking the sub in." Aris's voice left no room for argument. This was the culmination of his life's work, the vindication of a man he'd loved like a father. Kalen cursed under his breath but complied, his skill undeniable as he navigated the multi-million-dollar submersible toward the gash in the alien hull. The sound of metal scraping against the unknown material sent a shudder through the cockpit. Inside the wreck, the darkness was absolute. The ship's lights struggled against it, revealing a cavernous chamber. The walls were covered in the same spiraling glyphs, glowing with a faint, internal phosphorescence. In the center of the chamber, on a pedestal of the same basalt-like material, sat an object. It was a heart. Not a biological one, but a perfect, anatomically impossible sculpture of a heart, about the size of a human head. It was carved from what looked like pure obsidian, so black it seemed to drink the light. Its surface was covered in carvings so fine they were almost invisible, a fractal tapestry of the same glyphs that adorned the walls. And it was humming. It wasn't a sound they heard with their ears, but a vibration they felt in their teeth, in their skulls. It was a low, resonant frequency that seemed to bypass the auditory nerve and plug directly into the brainstem. It was a deeply unsettling, yet strangely calming sensation. "What in the hell is that?" Kalen asked, his voice strained. "The source of the world's first song," Aris whispered, the words escaping him without conscious thought. He guided the Hadel's primary manipulator arm forward. It was a delicate, nerve-wracking process. The claws, designed to lift tons of equipment, had to be gentle enough to cradle a priceless artifact. As the metal fingers closed around the obsidian heart, the hum intensified. The lights in the Hadel's cockpit flickered violently. The main screen dissolved into static. "Aris, we're losing power," Kalen shouted, his hands flying across the deadened controls. "The hum is overloading the systems. Get it in the containment basket and get us out of here," Aris ordered, his eyes fixed on the camera feed from the manipulator arm. The heart was now secured. The hum vibrated through the arm, through the sub's hull, making Aris's vision swim. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, a phantom memory of floating in warm, buoyant water, surrounded by silent, singing voices. With a jolt, the Hadel's backup power kicked in, bathing the cockpit in a dim, red emergency light. Kalen, wrestling with the controls, managed to fire the vertical thrusters, pulling them free from the alien wreck. The ascent was a tense, silent affair, the only sound the thrum of their own hearts and the persistent, invasive hum from the containment unit in the cargo bay. When they breached the surface, the Pacific sun was a blinding, glorious shock. The support vessel, the Odyssey, was a welcome sight, a bastion of noisy, familiar reality. As the Hadel was winched onto the deck, the science team swarmed it, their faces a mixture of relief and rabid curiosity. The obsidian heart was moved to the ship's primary containment lab, a sterile, pressurized chamber. It sat on a reinforced table, radiating its silent song. The hum was still there, a low thrum that permeated the entire vessel. Crew members complained of headaches, of a strange sense of distraction. Aris stood before the glass, staring at the artifact. He'd done it. He'd found something that would rewrite human history. He felt a surge of triumph, but it was hollowed out by a deep, inexplicable anxiety. The hum was in his head, a constant companion. That evening, he was on a video call with Dr. Lena Petrova, the world's foremost paleolinguist. Her face, framed by a chaotic halo of dark hair, was projected onto the lab's wall screen, her eyes wide with an academic hunger that matched his own. "It's magnificent, Aris," she said, her voice crackling slightly over the satellite link. "The glyphs, they don't align with any known language family. Not Proto-Indo-European, not Afro-Asiatic, nothing. This is a true UPART, an out-of-place artifact. This is a first-contact scenario, even if the other party is long dead." "Might not be," Aris said, then paused, unsure why he'd said it. The hum seemed to pulse in time with his words. "The ship, the material, it's biomechanical. It feels less constructed and more grown." "The more reason to get it to the Atoll Research Institute," Lena urged. "We can't do the kind of spectral analysis we need to on a rocking boat. The funding is already secured." Marcus is eager. Aris's jaw tightened at the mention of his brother. Marcus Thorne was the pragmatic, obscenely wealthy counterweight to Aris's academic idealism. He ran Thorne Industries, a global conglomerate that had funded this expedition. Marcus didn't care about knowledge. He cared about patents, about proprietary technology, about owning the future. The first major incident occurred 2 days later, as the Odyssey steamed towards the Institute's base in Guam. In the mess hall, a heated argument broke out between a Japanese engineer and a Russian geologist over a game of cards. Voices were raised, fists were clenched. The crew turned to watch the familiar, ugly theater of misunderstanding. Then it happened. As the engineer unleashed a torrent of furious Japanese, Aris, who knew only a few pleasantries in the language, understood every single word. He understood the nuance, the specific insult about the geologist's questionable parentage, the deep-seated frustration behind the anger. He looked around. On the faces of the Australian cook, the Filipino deckhand, the American captain, he saw the same dawning, horrified comprehension. The Russian geologist replied in his native tongue, his words a fluid, articulate stream of invective, and everyone understood him, too. The argument didn't stop, but it transformed. It became more pointed, more personal, stripped of the buffer of incomprehension. A stunned silence fell over the mess hall. The hum from the lab 3 decks below seemed to swell to become a clear, resonant tone. It was a C-sharp, Aris noted with a strange detachment. A perfect, unending note. He felt a tingling at the base of his skull, like a dormant circuit being switched on. He looked at Lena, who had been flown out to join them on the final leg of the journey and was sitting beside him. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly agape. "Did you?" she began, speaking in Russian, her native language. "Yes," Aris replied in perfect, unaccented Russian, a language he'd never studied in his life. "I understood everything." The euphoria was electric. They were on the cusp of the greatest discovery in human history. Not just an alien artifact, but the key to universal understanding. The Siren's heart, as the crew had nicknamed it, wasn't just a relic. It was a Rosetta Stone for the entire human race. War, diplomacy, trade, everything would be transformed. They had, by sheer accident, cured the biblical curse of Babel. The transfer to the Atoll Research Institute was handled with the urgency of a state secret. The facility was a marvel of modern engineering, a gleaming white complex built on a remote Pacific atoll, funded by Marcus Thorne's seemingly bottomless pockets. Marcus himself was there to greet them, a stark contrast to his brother. Where Aris was weathered and thoughtful, Marcus was sharp, tailored, and radiated an aura of impatient control. "Brother," Marcus said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He clapped Aris on the shoulder. "You've finally found something worth more than academic papers. Congratulations." "Marcus," Aris replied, his tone cool, "this isn't about profit. Everything is about profit, Aris. Profit, progress, power. They're all the same word in the language of reality." "Dr. Petrova," he said, turning his charm on Lena, "your work from this moment forward will redefine your field. Redefine everything." The heart was placed in the central observation chamber, a transparent sphere suspended in the middle of a massive atrium. The low hum, now dubbed the resonance, permeated the entire complex. Within hours, the effect was undeniable. The international team of scientists, technicians, and support staff conversed freely, their native languages melting into a single, shared stream of comprehension. A German physicist debated quantum mechanics with a Chinese biologist, their words flowing without impediment. It was a miracle, but Aris felt the other effect. The memories, they came in fleeting, disorienting flashes. At first they were sensory impressions. The taste of salt, not on his tongue, but in his very cells. The feeling of immense, gentle pressure all over his body. The sight of light filtering down from an unseen surface, casting shimmering, cerulean patterns on his skin. Webbed hands, his own. He stumbled during a meeting, gripping the edge of a table. In his mind's eye, he wasn't in a sterile conference room. He was soaring through a vast, underwater city of glowing coral spires. He was one of many, part of a silent, telepathic choir. There was no I, only we. A sense of belonging so profound it was painful. Then a discordant note in the silent song, a deep existential terror, the water turning cold, the light dimming, a shared memory of retreat, of hibernation, of pouring their collective consciousness into a vessel of eternal stone, to wait. He shared his experience with Lena. She too had been having them. They called themselves the Lumen, she whispered, her face pale. They were in her lab, surrounded by monitors displaying the heart's intricate glyphs, which she was now able to read not by translation, but by pure, intuitive understanding. They weren't pre-human, Aris, they were the first humanity, the first sentient life on Earth. They existed in the deep oceans for millions of years before the first primate walked on land. "Happened to them?" Aris asked, the hum in the room feeling less like a gift and more like a threat. "They didn't die out," Lena said, her voice trembling. "There was a cataclysm. A change in the planet's magnetic field, a solar event. It disrupted their biotelepathic abilities. It was like tearing a single consciousness into billions of screaming, isolated pieces. They couldn't survive it. So they built the heart, the coronor, the seat of songs as a repository, a psychic ark. They poured themselves into it, their memories, their consciousness, their very essence, and went to sleep, waiting for the planet to heal, for a new sentient species to evolve and find them." A cold dread washed over Aris. "And wake them up." News from the outside world was a cascade of chaos and wonder. The global understanding, as the media called it, had spread like a pandemic of clarity. The artifact on the remote atoll was a secret, but its effect was not. At the United Nations, a fiery debate between the Israeli and Palestinian ambassadors became a raw, shockingly honest conversation that left both sides in stunned, tearful silence. In war-torn regions, soldiers hesitated, suddenly understanding the fears and motivations of their enemies. Street vendors in Mumbai could haggle with tourists from Ohio. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. The downsides began to surface. With no language barrier, there were no secrets. Corporate espionage became as simple as standing in an elevator. Intimate relationships fractured as partners understood the unsaid thoughts, the hidden resentments. The delicate lies that greased the wheels of society were dissolved in an acid bath of perfect comprehension. Worse were the primal urges. People in coastal cities reported a strange, overwhelming desire to be in the water. Global news channels showed videos of thousands gathering on beaches, standing silently in the surf, staring out at the horizon. Productivity plummeted. The logical, structured world of human endeavor began to fray at the edges, replaced by a dreamy, instinctual lethargy. Humanity was remembering how to be part of a collective and forgetting how to be individuals. Marcus saw this not as a problem, but as an opportunity. "You see the beauty of it, Aris," he said, standing on the observation deck overlooking the atrium, the obsidian heart pulsing gently below them. "Chaos, it's what our species does best, but the resonance can trim the fat, it can unify us. No more war, no more division, one planet, one mind." "Dictator," Aris shot back. You don't want to unify humanity, you want to control it." "Is just a harsh word for guidance," Marcus said smoothly. "The Lumen had a collective consciousness. They were unified. We can be too. My team has figured out how to amplify the resonance. We can boost the signal from the heart, make the effect more potent, solidify the connection. We can guide the new global mind, shape it." Aris stared at his brother in horror. "You'll erase us, Marcus. You'll overwrite 7 billion individual minds with a ghost from the bottom of the sea. That isn't unity, it's extinction." "It's evolution," Marcus countered, his eyes gleaming with fanatical certainty. "And I will be its architect." Aris knew he couldn't reason with him. Marcus had already succumbed to the most dangerous human instinct of all, the lust for absolute power. He saw the guards posted around the atrium, their faces placid, their eyes distant. They weren't just following Marcus's orders. They were part of his burgeoning hive. He found Lena in her lab, frantically packing a small bag. She'd come to the same conclusion. "He's building an amplifier, Aris, a broadcast array on the north side of the atoll. He plans to synchronize it with the heart at sunrise tomorrow. When he does, the memories won't be fragments anymore. The Lumen consciousness will fully awaken. It will subsume us." "Can we do?" Lena's eyes were filled with a desperate fire. "The Lumen were terrified of being alone. Their consciousness is a chorus. It can't exist as a single voice. The heart is their ark, but it's also their prison. They put themselves in, and I think we can put them back in. We have to return the heart to the crushing silence of the trench. We have to sever the connection." "To the Erebus wreck," Aris breathed. "Back to its cradle. We'll never allow it. He's locked down the facility. The submersibles, the docks, everything." "Everything," Aris said, a grim plan forming in his mind. "He doesn't know the Hadal as I do. And he doesn't have Kalen." Getting a message out was nearly impossible. All communications were monitored. But Aris found a loophole, a hardwired maintenance line in the sub-bay that bypassed the main servers. He sent a single, coded message to a secure number Kalen had given him years ago. Albright's Folktel needs an ending. They had less than 12 hours. Aris and Lena moved through the institute, which was growing quieter, more serene. Scientists who had been buzzing with discovery a day ago now sat staring at screens, their expressions beatific and empty. The resonance was getting stronger, the C-sharp note a constant, enveloping presence. The air was thick with shared, silent thought. It was becoming harder to maintain a sense of self, to hold onto the sharp edges of individuality. Aris found himself fighting off waves of a placid, oceanic calm, a desire to simply stop and join the silent chorus. Lena was his anchor. Her linguistic training, her life spent dissecting the very structure of thought, seemed to give her a stronger defense. "Focus on the specifics, Aris," she coached him, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Think about the taste of coffee, the feeling of paper, the name of your first pet, concrete individual memories, that's the anchor, they are we. We must remain I." A reply came back on the maintenance terminal. A single word, dockside. Midnight, Kalen. Getting to the submersible bay was a descent into a waking dream. The guards they had to pass were no longer simple obstacles. Their eyes followed them with a placid, collective awareness. There was no suspicion, just a gentle, questioning pressure in Aris's mind, a silent inquiry. "Why do you struggle? Why do you swim against the current? Join us." Behold, Lena took the lead. She didn't fight the resonance. She leaned into it. She projected feelings of purpose, of alignment with Marcus's goals. She thought loudly about preparing the submersible for the amplification, projecting a sense of serene obedience. It was a terrifying mental gamble, a tightrope walk over a chasm of psychic oblivion. The guards let them pass, their gazes sliding away, accepting them as part of the whole. They found Kalen by the service entrance to the docks, dressed in the dark gear of a saboteur. He had arrived on a small, silent-running inflatable. "Getting a bit culty in there, Doc," Kalen said, his voice a welcome blast of cynical reality. "What's the plan?" "We're stealing the Siren's heart," Aris said. "And we're taking the Hadal." The main challenge was the heart itself. It sat in its transparent sphere in the atrium, the focal point of the entire institute. Getting to it would mean confronting Marcus and his inner circle, who were gathered there in a silent vigil. "We can't fight them all," Kalen stated. "They'll flood our minds before we get within 20 feet. "We won't fight their minds," Lena said, her eyes fixed on the pulsing artifact. "We'll talk to the ghost in the machine." Their plan was desperate. Kalen would create a diversion, a series of small, calculated explosions to disable the power to the atrium's magnetic suspension field and security doors. In the ensuing chaos, Aris and Lena would breach the chamber. Aris's job was to physically retrieve the heart. Lena's was to do the impossible. Kalen vanished into the service tunnels. Minutes later, a series of muffled thumps echoed through the complex. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the stark red of the emergency system. A deep groan sounded as the heart's containment sphere, its magnetic locks failing, settled onto its cradle. Aris and Lena sprinted into the atrium. Marcus and his acolytes were on their feet, disoriented but not panicked. Their collective consciousness was a palpable force, a wall of psychic pressure. Marcus turned and his eyes found Aris. There was no anger in them, only a profound, sorrowful disappointment. "Brother," the thought echoed in Aris's mind, not as a word but as a pure concept. "You are delaying the inevitable. You are clinging to a broken, lonely way of being." Aris ignored him, his focus narrowed to the containment sphere. He used a crowbar to shatter the weakened polyglass, the shards falling like broken promises. The hum of the heart washed over him, raw and unfiltered. The memories flooded his senses, the birth of stars seen from the ocean floor, the silent communion of a billion minds, the terror of dissolution, the long, patient sleep. He felt his own identity, his I, beginning to dissolve like salt in water. "Lena, now?" he choked out. Lena stood before Marcus, her eyes closed. She wasn't resisting the resonance, she was opening herself to it completely. She dove into the torrent of the lumen consciousness, not as an invader but as an emissary. She didn't project her own thoughts. She took the core of human experience, the fierce, paradoxical, and beautiful truths, and held them up to the ancient mind. She showed them the solitary joy of a painter finishing a masterpiece, the fierce love of a mother for her child, the bitter grief of a lone widower, the chaotic, defiant scream of a protester demanding freedom. She showed them sacrifice, betrayal, forgiveness, laughter, ambition, and despair. She showed them everything the lumen, in their perfect, placid unity, had never known. The glorious, terrible, and vibrant struggle of the individual. "We are not like you," she projected, her thought a spear of pure meaning. "To join you is to die. We choose to live, even if it means we live alone." A wave of psychic static erupted from the heart. It was a cry of pure, undiluted shock and confusion. The lumen had waited eons for a vessel to pour themselves into, never considering that the vessel might refuse. The acolytes around Marcus cried out, clutching their heads. The wall of psychic pressure shattered. Marcus staggered back, his connection to the hive mind severed. For the first time he looked merely human, a man stripped of his godhood, lost and afraid. Eris seized the moment. He lifted the heavy obsidian heart from its cradle. The stone was cold, impossibly so, and it vibrated with a deep, sorrowful pulse. He and Lena ran, leaving Marcus and his broken followers in the flickering red twilight. Kalen had the Hadal powered up and waiting. They loaded the heart into the same containment basket it had occupied on its journey up. The moment the hatch sealed, Eris felt the psychic pressure lessen, though the echo of the lumen's confusion still rattled in his skull. "Take us down," Eris said to Kalen, strapping himself in. The descent was a journey into hell. The lumen were no longer trying to absorb him, they were trying to stop him. The heart in the cargo bay was a conduit for their desperation. Eris's mind was assaulted with visions. He saw his lost mentor, Albright, beckoning to him from the glowing coral city, promising him answers. He saw a future of perfect peace, a world without pain or strife, offered to him if he would only turn back. He saw Lena at his side, not as a colleague, but as a silent, eternal partner in a shared consciousness, their individual minds blissfully merged. "It's not real, Eris," Lena said, her voice strained. She was fighting her own phantoms. "Anchor yourself." Eris gripped the controls, the cold metal a tether to reality. He thought of the acrid smell of coffee in a cheap diner, the sound of his father's laugh, the sharp sting of a paper cut. Small, stupid, beautifully human things, they reached the abyssal plain. The alien wreck was waiting, a dark tomb in the crushing blackness. Kalen navigated them back through the gash in its hull. The phosphorescent glyphs on the walls seemed dimmer now, weary. The pedestal in the center of the chamber was empty. Waiting. With the manipulator arm, Eris lifted the Siren's heart. He could feel the lumen's silent, pleading scream. They were an ancient, lonely intelligence, terrified of returning to their solitary prison. For a moment, he hesitated. Was he committing an act of preservation, or one of cruelty? He thought of the blank, placid faces back at the Institute. He thought of the vibrant, chaotic, wonderful mess of humanity. He chose the mess. He placed the heart back onto its cradle. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The hum ceased. The vibration in his skull vanished. The light from the glyphs on the walls extinguished. A silence deeper and more profound than any he had ever known filled the chamber, the submersible and his own mind. It was the silence of a forgotten god returning to its slumber. On the surface, the change was just as sudden. In a crowded Tokyo intersection, thousands of people blinked, looking at the strangers next to them with a sudden, sharp sense of alienation. The seamless flow of comprehension was gone, replaced by a cacophony of mutually unintelligible languages. The United Nations debate descended back into a frustrating stalemate of mistranslation. The soldiers on the battlefield remembered who their enemies were. The curse of Babel had been restored, but it was not a complete reset. Humanity was left with a ghost on its tongue, a lingering phantom limb of shared understanding. People could no longer understand foreign words, but they remembered the feeling of having done so. They had all shared the same strange, oceanic dream, and the memory of that dream lingered. Eris and Lena stood on the deck of the Odyssey a week later, watching the sun set over a world they had both saved and broken. Marcus was in custody, his assets seized, his empire dismantled. He was a man without a following, a prophet whose God had fallen silent. "Did we do the right thing?" Lena asked softly, pulling her jacket tighter against the evening chill. "I don't know," Eris admitted. "We chose freedom over unity, chaos over peace. I have to believe that was the right choice." The world was already grappling with the aftermath. Factions were rising, some dedicated to trying to replicate the resonance, others preaching against the dangers of any such false unity. The dreamers, those who yearned for the return of the oceanic calm, held vigils on beaches worldwide. Humanity was fractured, but it was also energized, wrestling with questions that had never before been asked. They had been shown a door to a different kind of existence, and even though that door had been slammed shut, the knowledge that it existed had changed the shape of the room forever. Eris looked down at the dark, inscrutable water. The Siren's heart was back in its abyss, its song silenced. But the echo remained, a permanent, resonant frequency in the collective unconscious of mankind. They had been given a glimpse of their own distant past and a possible, terrifying future. What they would build from the memory of that glimpse, a more empathetic world or one more deeply divided by the fear of what they had almost become, was a question that no one, not even the silent gods of the deep, could answer.